Hey, should be recording. And we could have some folks joining as we continue on here. So you might hear a few of the bells going off, and I'll be letting people in. So let's officially start. So welcome to our September event. We are so happy to have you here. And as I was mentioning, we have folks here from the Lower Mainland in BC, from Vancouver Island. I see some people I know from Winnipeg, from Manitoba, for example, some new friends from Ontario. So welcome to all of you to our regular Colloquium event series at the Centre for Research on Personhood and Dementia. We'd like to start by acknowledging this virtual space that we're in, by also linking ourselves to the land where we're actually physically finding ourselves. So the CRPID is a research center located at the University of British Columbia, which is on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam people. I myself am in Vancouver, on a different part of Vancouver, on Coast Salish lands. And given that we know that many of you are coming from different parts of the country and of BC, we invite you to say hello in the chat, as well as locate yourselves. And this is especially important as we think about this week, as we approach September 30th, which is, as you know, the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and an important time for all of us to think about our past, whether we identify as researchers, as settlers, as Indigenous peoples, and to think about where we want to go as we move forward together. So having taken a bit of time to say that, I'm going to invite one of the co-directors of the Centre, Dr. Deborah O'Connor, to say hello and to welcome our speakers this afternoon. Deborah, take it away.
All right, thank you. Welcome to everybody who's come to this first, I guess, the first of colloquium of the new school year, anyhow. And thank you, Mariko, for organizing this one and taking the leadership among our entire colloquium series. I'm really delighted to actually welcome Habib, Kishore, and Carrie to this presentation. First, I'll start with Habib and note that he's a chair and professor in the Department of Gerontology, SFU. And for me, one of the primary roles he's also had is as one of the founding researchers and members of the Center for Research on Personhood and Dementia, way back when. We were realizing we're approaching 20 years now that the center has been in existence. He's internationally recognized for his work related to dementia and the environment, including both providing insight into the environment, but also for tools related to how to understand and assess the environment. In addition to editing a couple of different journals, he's written at least 2 books that I'm aware of, one of which has forever changed how I understand people's belongings in the ways that we connect with our belongings. And every time I say to somebody, oh, I really like your rocking chair, oh, I like your blanket, and I hear the story behind it, I think of Habib, and that's been for many years. So Habib, I believe it's a PI on the project that they're going to be talking about today, and is here with 2 other members of the team. The first member that I'll introduce is Carrie Bolio. Sorry, I was trying to give it the French pronunciation, was told not to, who is, from my understanding, a very recent grad from the Department of Gerontology at SFU. And prior to going in to become a gerontologist, so is now here, as she noted earlier, speaking as her first speaking gig as a full-fledged gerontologist. Prior to going back to do her gerontology degree, she also brings a very strong background in art therapy in her background, and is very focused on community engaged research. The other person who will be also presenting today is Kishore Kishore, I told you I would screw up your last name. Cesar Rahman, I think something like that, who is the PhD candidate with the Department of Gerontology at SFU. By background, Kishore has also got an architect background, and he's currently working around looking at the use of outdoor space by people with dementia. Kishore has also been, in addition to his links to primary links to SFU, has also been a doctoral assistant on some of the projects affiliated with the center, including the Flipping Stigma project. So it's nice to see you again, Kishore. It's been a wee while. With that, I am going to turn over to hear more about Dementia Inclusive Streets, Community Access, Participation and Engagement, or the DEMScape project. I'm always really impressed on how people come up with such amazingly catchy ways of acronyms. And I turn it over to Habib, Kari, and Kishore.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Deb. That was a very kind, thoughtful introduction to our team. And I would like to welcome everybody here who have joined us this afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you for making time for this presentation. I also want to thank Mariko for organizing these Colloquium events from CRPD. And also I want to take a minute to acknowledge that I have had the privilege to be affiliated with the Center for Research on Personhood and Dementia at UBC for a very long time. As Deb mentioned, the center has been around nearly for 20 years. So this center's core people, the faculty and the doctoral students, master students, and other people who have been affiliated with them really have been an exceptional catalyst for many of us in thinking about good projects and good engagement in the community to make a difference for lives of people with dementia. So I've been privileged to be part of the center for quite some time now. So let's begin our project. As Deb read out, our project is called DEMScape, basically referring to the buildscape, because we're focusing on the buildscape / landscape or built form of urban environment and how that impacts people living with dementia in terms of mobility and participation, engagement in the community. Okay. Next, Carrie. Thank you. So we got a large team here, and three institutions are involved. So SFU, UBC, and UNBC. UNBC is University of Northern British Columbia. And from UBC, our colleagues Lillian Hung and Alison Feeney are involved as co-researchers. And from UNBC, we have Shannon Freeman, Mark Grew, and Dawn Hemingway. And then we got all of the other names here. Project manager Carrie Randa, who's here with us. Project coordinators Kishore, Joey, Emma, KM specialist Lily Wren, GIS specialist Mohammed, visiting researcher Stephanie, and a number of research assistants. So it's a big team and this team is evolving. There are new people who joined us in the recent past. Okay, let's carry on. So this project is part of, would fit under what we know as dementia-friendly or dementia-inclusive communities. So I'm sure many of you are aware of this concept and this movement that is going on for some time. And if we look at the definition from the Alzheimer's Disease International, their way of characterizing what dementia-friendly or inclusive communities are says like they can dementia-friendly and inclusive community can be defined as a place in which people with dementia and their carers are empowered, supported, and included in society, understand their rights, and recognize their full potential. So there's a lot behind this statement, and we can spend hours talking about and unpacking this definition. And there's different components, obviously. If we look at municipalities or organizations that's trying to come up with a dementia-friendly action plan and do some programs, dementia education is first and foremost, dementia education for different stakeholders, including the public and so on. For our project, we make the argument that the neighborhood environment, next, Carrie. The neighborhood environment is an important component, an element of developing a dementia-friendly, dementia-inclusive community. So we know that around 70% older adults living with dementia under the age of 80 live in the community. Almost 60% over 80 live in the community. They're basically making the point that people are in the community, they are conducting their daily lives in the community with some level of cognitive decline, those who have been diagnosed with dementia. So the community environment is critically important to support their quality of life. And when we talk about community or the neighborhood, because this is where the out-of-home activity and social participation takes place, we have to talk about the physical environment, because the physical environment is, or the built environment is important in enabling and disabling mobility orientation, wayfinding. We know from anecdotal evidence that people with dementia and cognitive decline, as the trajectory progresses, that who have occasional infrequent to frequent moments of disorientation, wayfinding challenge, and challenging circumstances when they're trying to get services. And these experiences affect their sense of confidence, and in some ways they affect their dependence on their care partners. So let's move on. Next. So this is where we talk about some of those challenges that we have in the context of unsupportive neighborhood environment, same neighborhood built environment. One is wayfinding and orientation. So wayfinding and orientation basically referring to, can people find their way around in the neighborhood effectively without getting lost, without getting a sense of experience some anxiety. And once they get to location, can they orient themselves where they are? And I would add that this is not only the urban outdoor spaces, but also indoor spaces. We know people with living with dementia sometimes have challenges in grocery stores, finding what they're looking for in the aisles, or getting into a large complex environment like a community center or hospital. So they can feel anxious, overwhelmed, especially in complex, busy, loud environments where there's a lot of stimulation, and stimulation can be challenging. Somebody living with cognitive decline, stimulation from the physical environment, noise, lighting, and so on, stimulation also from the social context, the social milieu of where they are. So all of these challenges lead to the broader challenge of not being able to effectively access local destinations and amenities. And the impact can be captured by the gradual abandonment in visiting community places and staying at home. But along with that is levels of dependence on their care partners and possible social isolation over time. And then these are also affecting their overall cognitive and physical health over time. As they're becoming less independent and become more dependent, their frequency of going out would decrease, and then potentially socially more isolated, and then affecting their overall cognitive and physical health. So as I mentioned before, the neighborhood built environment is an important area of focus for research, policy, and practice under the Dementia-Friendly Inclusive Community Approach Action Plan. There are a number of municipalities in British Columbia that have dementia-friendly action plan, and they include built environment as an important component. So next. Okay, before we talk about the specifics of our study, one broader context to acknowledge is to break down a bit about what we mean by the neighborhood built environment. So what we're looking at is a conceptual diagram that outlines the domains and features of the built environment. So what you're looking at is taken from Burton Mitchell's work, which was synthesized by another Canadian researcher, Samantha Biglery. So this is quite helpful for us to get a sense of what are we talking about really when we say the neighborhood built environment. So as you can see on this slide, there are three bubbles here. The top one is about walkability and land use strategies. So land use strategies would mean that how is land used? This is a critically important planning and zoning decision. Are we using land just for residential? Are we using land just for commercial? Are we having mixed land use? So these are important planning decisions that municipalities take that have impact on how, to what extent walkability can take place. But walkability is also about specific issues like small blocks and hierarchy of streets and so on. And also, if you look at the bottom part, the lower bubble, it talks about some of the specific elements in the urban environment and suburban environment, like bus shelters, public toilets, accessible public washrooms, seating, sidewalks. And in the middle, you have the bubble, the conceptual bubble of wayfinding. So, which is talking about clear signage, landmarks, and distinctive features at junctions, and so on. So all three are relevant when we talk about dementia-friendly neighborhood environment. But one thing to note is that the top one and the lower one are more frequently talked about, which is the walkability land use strategies, urban form and comfort and safety, when we talk about age-friendly community design. So age-friendly community design concepts overlap with dementia-friendly. When we talk about dementia-friendly, there are specific aspects of the build form that need to be highlighted in addition to what is important in the age-friendly communities. So these two are overlapping broader domains of age-friendly and dementia-friendly, but all three domains that we're looking at here are important when we talk about dementia-friendly neighborhood environment. Next. So one issue that we acknowledge very quickly, and that's why we wanted to do this study, is that there isn't much empirical evidence in this area overall, globally speaking. There have been a few studies in Australia, in the UK, here and there, but not much overall, except for anecdotal evidence. And as far as we know, this is the first study in Canada where we're talking about having an evidence base about what in the neighborhood built environment affects people's ability to be independently mobile and taking participation in the community, in the daily activities. We do have a lot of evidence when we talk about design in the interior environment. So when we talk about seniors housing, or when we talk about nursing home design, long-term care design, there's a substantial body of literature in that area for addressing the needs of people with dementia. But when we talk about the outdoor environment, the neighborhood environment, there is really very little evidence at this point. So we have been very fortunate to be able to conduct the study in Canada. Next. So our objectives are, number one, is to identify neighborhood destinations that people living with dementia visit. Where do they go? Typically, what destinations are they going? And then are there changes in patterns of those visits over time? And then secondly is identifying the environmental features that affect outdoor mobility, engagement, and social participation. So we will mostly focus on the second objective in this presentation, but this is a large project where different kinds of methods were used, and we also have information, we have data on the first objective as well, which we're not going to touch on in this presentation. So next. So our study participants are mostly in Metro Vancouver. Overall, we engaged with 32 individuals living with mild to moderate dementia or mild cognitive impairment and their care partners in some cases. They had care partners who were interviewed as dyads, I mean, the care partner and the person with lived experience. So when we mention that a person living with mild to moderate dementia or mild cognitive impairment, this is self-identified individuals, people who self-identified as having a diagnosis of dementia. And in Metro Vancouver, we had 26 participants, and among those 26, 11 were individuals and 15 were dyads, meaning that these dyads include individuals living with dementia and their care partners. So they participated as a dyad, as a couple in our interview sessions. And then in Prince George, 6 participants and dyads. So this is the other context of our study, that we wanted to have a location in the interior of BC that is a very different urban form. The landscape is very different in a more rural, semi-urban context, quite different than Metro Vancouver, low density. A lot of neighborhoods don't have sidewalks, for example, and the weather is also different. So to get that variability from Metro Vancouver, as well as a more rural / northern region of BC, and that was our aspiration. So we were able to collect data, engage with 6 participants in Prince George area. Next. So our study design could be formally can be called as mixed methods sequential design, which is basically referring to both qualitative and quantitative methods. Although for the most part, this study utilize qualitative methods. There are a few quantitative components, but for the most part, it's qualitative in nature. And the methods, the data collection process was quite engaging with the persons with lived experience. We had 4 sessions with each participant. So these 4 sessions did not happen one day. It happened over a number of weeks. So maybe first session happened, sit down interview, and there was a week's gap, and then we went back to the same individual. At a second session, another few days of gap, at a third session, and so on. So there's a fairly elaborate engagement by each of the participants in the study. So let's look at what happened briefly in each of these sessions. The first session was a sit-down interview where we administered a structured questionnaire which is called ACT Out, activity outside the home, which was addressing the first objective that we mentioned earlier, which is where do they go and how things may have changed over time. But some of these things come up in the other interviews as well. But we formally collected data to the structured questionnaire. We collected demographics, of course, and then we got into the walking routine of where do they walk typically. And then let's move on to next one, session 2. This was a few days later, another semi-structured sit-down interview where our research team members, these are basically 2 of our team members who went and had a semi-structured sit-down interview session with the participant. And on this session, we focused on the walking experience, their attitudes and perception, their habits in walking, and what are the environmental context that they experience. So getting a broad perspective of their walking behaviors, walking experience, but also more specifically, our team worked with the participant to identify a particular route. And that's what the route planning is talking about, because the route planning was conducted in order to inform session 3, which is about not about sit-down interview, which is a go along or walk along interview. Next. So this session was different than the other 3 sessions. In this session, we invited the participant to take a walk, and we went along, we meaning our team members, 3 of our team members. One person was walking alongside with the person with lived experience and asking some questions, raising some issues. There are 2 other team members who were walking behind a few steps, and they were taking notes on different aspects of this walk along process. So this is a very interesting method. The walk along interview is what we call an embedded interview, embedded in the environment, embedded in the neighborhood. So it's not just talking about in a sit-down situation, but as they are walking in the environment, they're talking about their experience. So that really is an interesting, innovative method to really provide the context of what we're talking about, what we're interested in the environment. In situ, people look at things and they comment on things, they talk about things. So there are a lot of environmental cues and triggers that can be beneficial as they talk about their environmental experience in walking. So again, the focus, as this section mentions, was how the participants perceive, understand, and interact with the neighborhood environment. So we had a set of questions that we were asking as we walked along with the person. And then the final session, next. Okay, so before we see the final section, let's look at that for 1 second. Yeah, so this is you see our team members on the left. You see Carrie, who is with us. and then also Kishore in the front. And then this was the first session where we were trying out like the walk along with the person with lived experience. So as Kishore is walking along ahead with the person with lived experience, Carrie and another team member walking behind. And as you can see, there's a camera. And we call these cameras GoPro cameras. GoPro cameras are used in two ways in this project. One is one of our team members, in this case, Carrie, was wearing the camera on top of her head and then video recording. But we also invited the participant herself or himself or themselves to have the camera on there. So we had two cameras available. And if they're comfortable, they would also wear the camera on their head. So, and we have many participants willing to take that on. So we really have an interesting set of video data as well that really captures the go along from their vantage point, because the video is obviously on their head. And you have the video data that we are also analyzing as you're looking at other data. So, so this is on the right-hand side, you see how it might have worked in typical walk-along interview. There's our team member at the front, in this case, Kishore, and then a person with lived experience. And then behind them are two team members who are taking notes about different aspects of the environment. And also one of the team members is capturing the video recording of the journey. All right, next. And the final session is session 4, which is the video elicitation sit-down interview. So in order to dive deeper into what happened at the previous walk-along interview, we looked at, between session 3 and 4, our team looked at the video that was recorded during the walk-along interview and identified some clips that are more interesting, potentially more interesting. And those videos were shown on the final session. That's why they're called video elicitation sit-down interview. So we invited the participant to watch the video, clips of the video, and then reflect on that and dive deeper what else they would like to share beyond what they might have shared during the walk along itself. So this is like a debriefing elaboration session based on session 3 in a more formal way. Okay, next. So yes, so this is basically pointing out some of the data analysis that we are engaged in at this point. So we have been working on this project for about 2 years now, and our team has been extremely busy last 2 years in recruiting people, doing a lot of outreach work for that recruitment process, and then engaging people with lived experience, and then having some advocate from. We had a community advisory group also who advised on different ways. And then now we are in this process of data analysis. So there are the number of components, several components in this project. We're doing different kinds of analysis. One is thematic analysis of interview transcripts. That's really the lot of data that we have collected in the sit-down interviews, as well as the walk-along interviews. So Kishore will present some of those initial findings from the thematic analysis. We're also doing video analysis of the walk-along interview. And there's some interesting elements that can be discovered through the video analysis, because that's more actual visual representation of the walk-along interviews. We're doing statistical analysis of the session 1 questionnaires that include the ACT OUT questionnaire that I mentioned earlier. And then we're also conducting some GIS spatial analysis, which is really referring to the GPS data that we have. As people walked, we have the walking route captured through GPS, and then we are collecting GIS information, meaning geographical information system information from different databases of where they walked. And then we're analyzing the decision making about where they walked vis-a-vis what is happening in the urban form through this GIS analysis. So so that we're not going to go into these at this point. We're just going to stay on the thematic analysis for this presentation. Next. I think I'll hand it over to Kishore at this point. Kishore, go ahead.
Thank you, Habib. Hi, everyone. I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the coding framework that we developed to guide our thematic analysis. So what we've been doing with our interview transcripts is coding them using qualitative data analysis software. And this is the framework that we came up with to categorize our data into meaningful units. And this is a framework that grows and evolves as we make progress in analyzing our transcripts. But more or less, this is kind of how we've divvied up the different components in understanding outdoor walking experience as expressed by our participants. So we're looking at different components of the physical aspects, psychological and emotional aspects, cognitive aspects, social and temporal aspects. And we're going to be looking at some of these just to give you a little bit of flavor of what we've been analyzing today in this presentation. Next slide, Carrie. So this is just a screenshot of the code book that we are building as we analyze the data. So what you see is a screenshot of a few codes. So as we kind of code the transcripts, we build out descriptions and definitions of each code under those 5 categories that we showed you in the previous slide. And this is something that, again, we're developing and refining as we move along the analysis process. Next slide, Carrie. Okay, so in this presentation, we're going to be looking at some preliminary findings from the thematic analysis of our transcripts, specifically the interviews with the Metro Vancouver participants. So that's 26 participants out of the total sample size of 32. We collected a lot of data. So there's over 2,000 pages of transcripts in our overall data set. And just to remind you again, we're looking at the second, third, and fourth interviews transcripts. So the first sit-down interview, the walk-along interview, and then the final follow-up sit-down interview that Habib mentioned earlier. And these are some of the initial themes that our analysis is pointing at. And we're going to be touching on a highlight or two under each of these themes in this presentation. So yeah, next slide, Carrie. The first theme is the motivation to walk in the neighborhood. So under this theme, most participants found walking to be a fairly important part of their lives, either as a health promotion and maintenance activity, or as an opportunity for positive stimulation. But in most instances, what we heard from participants is that it is an integral part of their everyday routine. In the first direct quote below on the slide, you see a participant says, "I still walk. My knowledge is if I don't, I'm doomed." So forms an indispensable part of a lot of our participants' everyday lives. And pointing at some of the temporal aspects that we're finding in the data, participants talk about shifting attitudes over time towards walking. So what might have been a more physically intensive or challenging or an activity done to challenge oneself in the past has now become something that they do for leisure with convenience and comfort in mind. So in the second direct quote at the bottom of the slide, you see the participant says, "The last 2 years, my condition has been brought to the fore. Before that, I did a lot of walking, but now I don't. I do some walking, but not so much." And this was a recurring theme in a lot of our participants' interviews, where they talked about the quantum of walking decreasing over time, especially since the onset of dementia. Next slide, please, Gary. Okay, so in this slide, we're talking about the perceptions that participants shared of the outdoors and the neighborhood. Most participants considered the neighborhood to be a familiar place. Now, the familiarity that they have with their neighborhood was gained through long-term residence or through continued exposure over time in the neighborhood environment. And their sense of familiarity was associated with feelings of comfort, mastery, and independence. In the first direct quote, a participant underscores the value of the street that she lives on in terms of the familiarity that it holds for her. So this participant talked about Fifth Street, and she said, "I'm familiar with Fifth. If I get off Fifth, I'm not sure sometimes where I am." And this participant has been very strategic in developing their walking routine so that it happens mostly on this particular section of Fifth Street. And that's the section that she's most confident walking on. In the second direct quote, this participant talks about why familiarity is so important to them. She says, "I'm imagining walking in a place where I'm unfamiliar and therefore I'm uncomfortable and I'm anxious about what I'm doing. Am I doing the correct thing? And worrying what's around the corner. Whereas here, I know pretty well what's around the corner and where to go for help." So again, that sense of mastery and really knowing how to navigate, an unexpected scenario if it were to come up in an environment where people know where things are if they need them. The next slide, please, Gary. Thank you. So in this slide, we look at different dementia-related walking challenges that participants shared with us. First being places that are overstimulating and generate discomfort. This was mostly described in conjunction with places that are noisy, places that are crowded. So in this direct quote, the first one on this slide, participant says, "My dementia doesn't like too busy. It doesn't like crowds. I get confused. If it's too busy, then I get agitated." So in this particular example, this participant tried as much as possible to, although they lived in in a neighborhood which tends to get quite crowded, they tried to walk outside when they knew that it wouldn't be as crowded and tried to avoid peak hour traffic as well. In the second point, participants talk about experiencing trouble, remembering route details, and identifying places in their neighborhood. So in this direct quote, this participant says, "I still often get street names confused. I sometimes get them backwards." And in this participant's case, the neighborhood that they live in, the street layout there is composed primarily of streets named after numbers rather than street names. So all the, but this participant was particularly talking about an intersection where, say, one street was 100th Street and the other was 100th or 115th Avenue. And that's what they got confused with, trying to distinguish between the two. And the last point here is participants experiencing the fear of becoming lost in the outdoors. This participant says, "I've been lost a few times. There was an unpleasant experience. You're looking for clues, and if the memory is faulty, if you're lost, you're doomed." So a few participants pointed at the potential of losing one's way or becoming disoriented, even in familiar places. So it is scary experience for our participants when they aren't able to recall those cues that they know they have in the environment. It's just that moment of disorientation can become really overwhelming for them to get through. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we're looking at how participants get support from others to walk outside. The big one here is care partner support, and this mainly came from our dyads. The care partner plays a crucial role in increasing the participants' confidence and their sense of safety when they walk outside. And care partners also mentioned that their presence serves as a second set of eyes to look out for problem areas, especially those that present risks to participants' safety, physical safety, and making sure that the participant is made aware of those in case they fail to pay attention at times. So in the direct quote here, one gentleman says, there's very little vehicle traffic in his neighborhood. He says, so it's very safe. I usually go with my wife when she finds the area is not that secure. She either stands beside me or else prevents me from going. And in the walk along interview with this participant, the care partner would often walk a few steps ahead to check if there were any cars at the intersection, to alert her husband to pause and wait before carrying on. So that was something that came up with other dyads as well. The other piece is around community awareness and support. Some participants talked about how they seek help when they're walking by themselves, from passers-by, from neighbors, as well as from local businesses, especially in the summer months when they walk outside and it's hot. They have, talked about stopping and taking a break at boutique and getting a glass of water to drink. So this sense of dementia awareness and inclusivity runs through the social fabric of the community that they live in. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we're talking about being cautious while walking outside. So most participants spoke about knowing different physical risk factors along their walking route. This included level differences, inclines, trip hazards, mostly to do with curbs, curb cuts, and sidewalks that were damaged or displaced. And this knowledge was accrued over time and as one age and through experience. So in the first direct quote, this participant said, as we age, we sometimes grow a little bit smarter in some senses due to having a fall or trip. So when we're out somewhere, we pay attention subliminally to cue things that might be around us that might be trip hazards. And building that point further around prior incidents and problematic encounters, contributing to that sense of knowing. The second direct quote is from a participant who says, I'm careful when I walk in the city because I fell down recently. After that, I realized I have to watch because they, meaning the sidewalk, poke up and they can trick you. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have two photos from different participants' walk-along interviews. And in both cases, participants talk about the risks posed by damaged sidewalks in their neighborhood. And in the first photo on the left side, this participant says, you see, this is the unevenness here. One has to be careful with them. And in another instance on the right side, this participant talks about how the trees and the tree roots play a role in contributing to the sidewalk damage. They say it's getting worse all the time because of the trees. It's pulling up this, look at this pavement. They chose the wrong trees for this street. Next slide, please. So in addition to the risks attributed to physical factors or the physical environment, participants also spoke about risks associated with other road users, the presence of drivers, cyclists, skateboarders, scooter users, and other pedestrians as well. In the first direct quote here on the slide, the participants spoke about a street intersection in their neighborhood where they've often encountered drivers not obeying the stop sign, and particularly emphasizing needing to be mindful around turning vehicles when they're crossing the street. So that was something that other participants also mentioned. And the other direct quote is around cyclists. So this was from a participant who lived in a neighborhood where there's a higher proportion of cyclists. And she said, cyclists don't have their own lanes. They're on the sidewalk. So you have to be careful of the cyclists because you're walking. Next slide, please. And this participant, the same participant as earlier, as we were walking during the walk along interview, we were walking on this very narrow gravel path, as you can see on the photo, alongside these tracks. And she saw this cyclist approaching us. So she had to kind of step off to the side and stop walking. And when we showed her this clip in the follow-up interview, she said, no respect for older adults. People are very inconsiderate. If cyclists are in their lane, it's fine. But if they're on the same lane as me, I don't like it. I think it could be dangerous. And shortly after this encounter, the participant also, nearly stumbled and tripped and fell. So, these interruptions, unforeseen pauses can also disrupt the rhythm, the walking pace that the participant has going. Next slide, please. This theme is around having a mental map of the neighborhood. The first point here is understanding the neighborhood layout helps with route planning and decision-making. So here in the first quote, the participant talks about how they have one street that they're very familiar with, which is 224th Street, but the rest isn't as clear to them. So 224th Street serves as a frame of reference for them to kind of orient themselves to their surroundings in the area. Similarly, in the second quote, the participant speaks about the value of grid layout and the logic of streets that are numbered sequentially helps her or could potentially help her orient herself to a relatively unfamiliar environment. And the third point here is around mental milestones and checkpoints that participants have in their mental map. So what we found with multiple participants is they had these points on their walking route where they would stop and check in with themselves to see, to gauge the amount of energy that they had left and decide whether they want to keep walking or they would decide, okay, it's time to head back home and turn back. So in this case, this participant talks about how he likes to break his route into little segments and assess how to proceed and decide how to go as he goes along the way. Next slide, please. Okay. So here we're looking at how participants use neighborhood environment features to cope with their walking challenges. In the first slide, we're looking at how different sidewalk features are employed to avoid obstacles or risk factors. In the image on the left, the participant is pointing at the boulevard strip on their sidewalk. And she talks about how she walks on the boulevard on this particular section of the sidewalk to avoid walking near the trees because of the sidewalk damage in that area. So having that extra space allows the participant to widen their walking path as needed. And on the photo on the right, the participant talks about the seawall and how The recent change since the pandemic, where cyclists are no longer allowed to use the seawall, has given her or has afforded a better experience walking along the seawall, avoiding cyclists altogether. And cyclists had been a huge issue for her, especially on sidewalks prior to this change. So that was something that was further reinforced by the signs that you see on in the photo here that prohibits cycles from accessing the seawall. Next slide, please. Okay, so here, the environmental features being used to orient and wayfind was another piece that came through in the analysis. Participants spoke about visually distinctive elements that help enhance their route memory, as well as signage that helps them identify places and streets. So in this photo, we were walking in the participant's neighborhood in the walk along interview, and this participant asked me, is this street A? And then before I answered, she looked at the sign across the street and said, oh yeah, that's right. The street is the one that I was thinking of. And, looking at the signage helped confirm which street she was on. So that was something that came up in other instances as well. Next slide, please. And then this last one here, where this participant is pointing at a sculpture across the road. And she says, look at the artwork over there. Different, eh? Different is good. I look for it, meaning when she's walking to a destination in the area, she normally looks for the sculpture, and it helps mark that street intersection and gives it identity and helps reinforce a memory of the area. So next slide, please. And the next one here is the example of a neighborhood park being a landmark for this participant. So this participant recalled, being on the street that she normally doesn't walk on, and experiencing this sudden feeling of disorientation and not really knowing where she was. Until she approached the street intersection and saw the park that she's pointing at. And seeing that park reminded her that she was near her home and she was safe. And she talked about how this park was a big part of her mental map of the neighborhood. So having these landmarks is really useful to our participants. Next slide, please. This is the last one that I'll touch on. So participants also talked about how they see different neighborhood environmental features being improved to foster that sense of dementia inclusivity and accessibility. They talked about different ways of improving sidewalk accessibility, street crossing, and also introducing places to rest and public washrooms. As well as improved signs and landmarks. So just to give you a taste of what participants shared with us, in the photo on the left, the participant said they chose the wrong trees for this place. Roots are really very aggressive. What they have to do is go to another type of tree. And this participant had a background in landscape architecture, so they were able to harness their professional knowledge to come up with this recommendation. On the right, we see an image of the bollards at the street intersection. And the participant says the bollards would be so much more noticeable if they were painted the same as the yellow. She's referring to the tactile strips on the curb ramp. And funnily enough, we saw bollards that were painted yellow at the end of the walk. And she pointed at those and said, see, look, these ones are so much better, and said that she'd be recommending them to the city to make those changes across the city. So that's all from me, and I'm going to hand it back to Habib.
So we're going to move on to our last phase section of the presentation, where we talk about knowledge mobilization. So knowledge mobilization basically is referring to how can we really apply what we're learning here for policy impact and interventions in our neighborhoods. So in this project, we have developed 3 resources, and we're going to touch on 2 resources. So the first one is on the top, Dementia Inclusive Planning and Design Guidelines. So these guidelines are meant to inform municipal planners and decision makers on effective, responsive physical planning and design decisions to make communities more dementia inclusive. This is really the rubber hitting the road, so to speak, in terms of how municipal decisions, developers' decisions make an impact of how our built form looks like and functions like, right? That's really an important important stakeholder. And then the short video is more about public awareness and advocacy video, educational advocacy video about the importance of the neighborhood environment impacting the walking experience of the study participants. So that's something we will get into. And then we are not going to talk about the environmental audit tool. This is also a community-based dementia advocacy. It's for community-based dementia advocacy organizations, persons living with dementia, to actually take charge in their own hands and do self-assessment of what's working in their own neighborhood. So this is an easy-to-use environmental audit tool. It's not a research audit tool. This is an easy-to-use audit tool for people living with dementia and their advocates to collect some data in the neighborhood hotspots and then take that information to the neighborhood, municipal council and then transportation engineers and so on and so forth. So we're going to touch on the first 2 or share the first 2 next. So I'm mindful of the time. So I'm going to go through this part very quickly. So pardon me for that. I do want to save some time for Carrie to come in and talk about the video, because that's also a very important resource that we have developed from our team. So this particular resource is about dementia inclusive planning and design guidelines that I mentioned. Next. And there was a process through which we really engaged with the literature, engaged with the municipal planners. In a few municipalities in Metro Vancouver, we conducted a community forum earlier this year. And then based on these different components and process, we developed the dementia inclusive planning and design guidelines. So by the way, on the left-hand side, the number 1 is referring to the gray literature and also empirical literature, but there's a lot of gray literature, meaning other different municipalities across the world have done some good work and some guidelines that have been published. So we try to synthesize all of that and highlight what are the key priorities from that, along with our BC context of municipal planners and community forums input. Next. So yeah, again, we have to already mention this, our key audiences are municipalities, developers, community organizations, and of course, people with lived experience. Next. And the guidelines are framed by these principles that we know from the literature: familiarity, comfort, accessible, distinct, legible, safe. So once again, these are some guidelines that are coming from the literature and guidelines. And once again, we synthesize that. But as I mentioned, the community forum, we brought in some of the participants of our own study, the DEMScape study, the actual empirical study, and shared a draft outline of these guidelines that we're about to share now, and got input from some of our participants. It's a combination. These principles did frame the overall context of our guidelines, but we actually talked with people with lived experience and got their input, and also the planners, part of the municipalities here in Metro. Next. So very quickly, the guidelines are organized by 3 scales or 3 realms. First is the neighborhood scale, broad planning decisions. Second is the street scale. And the third is the detailed design scale. Next. So just to give you a flavor of this, each realm, for example, the neighborhood scale in the guidelines would include, each realm has a number of strategies. So in this example, the neighborhood scale has 5 strategies. They include land use designation, street grids, building form, and so on. So these are broad planning decisions that have critical impact of what gets built and how we can actually get into the street level and the micro design level. Next. And each of these strategies, for example, land use designation has a number of action items. In this case, there are 2 action items that are mentioned. So each of these action items are also illustrated either with an illustration like this or with an actual photograph. Next. So again, quickly, the realm 2 is street scale. There are 5 strategies here. Street scale, we could talk about pedestrian paths, sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, transit stops, critically important element in the street scale, and building edges and entrances. Next. And within each street scale, again, each strategy, for example, the strategy of pedestrian paths and sidewalks would have some action items, and these are some of the two action items under that particular strategy. And again, a combination of illustration and images like photos from different, all across the world. Next. And this is the third realm, which is the detailed design scale. This has a lot of elements, as you can see, 10 strategies. These include seating, public art, toilets, washrooms, signage, and so on. So these are really the micro scale environmental features that are critical as people interact with the environment. Next. Again, just as an example, seating is a one strategy. And then talk about seating, what exactly do we want to do about seating? Placing frequently place seating, comfortable, accessible, familiar, shaded, pleasant, and so on. So getting into more nuts and bolts of what can be done in each of these strategies would be reflected through these action items. Next. Okay, I think we will come back. Carrie will touch on how we are planning to use the guidelines. But Carrie will first share the knowledge mobilization video. Over to you, Carrie.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for setting up the project so nicely. I'm super excited to share about our knowledge mobilization video. So the purpose was to educate on the role of built environment as an essential component of dementia-friendly and inclusive communities, as well to challenge stereotypes of what it means to be a person living with dementia in Canadian neighborhoods, and to inspire action that includes persons living with dementia in municipal decision-making and planning processes. So we developed this video with three key stakeholder groups in mind. So the first was governmental organizations like the Public Health Agency of Canada, Dementia Friendly Communities Canada, and Health Canada, as well as non-governmental organizations like the Alzheimer's Society of BC, Alzheimer's Society of Canada, and the Office of the Seniors Advocate. And then, as Habib has mentioned, the second stakeholder group was municipal planners, urban designers, and educators. And then last but not least is people living with dementia, their care partners, and the general public, really with the goal of inspiring hope, optimism, and engagement. So our video showcases 3 study participants with mobility, engagement, and participation challenges, as well as successes in their neighborhoods, and adaptation strategies, as well as agency in maintenance of independent function and well-being. As well, the video documents the openness and interest of people living with dementia to lend their voices to advocacy and awareness-raising community-engaged research initiatives that challenge stereotypes and really embody the spirit of Canada's Dementia Strategic Plan. So we were so lucky to collaborate with 3 community-dwelling people living with dementia, and as mentioned before, mild to moderate dementia or mild cognitive impairment, as well as their care partners. In Metro Vancouver, we had 2 participants, so 1 individual in Richmond and 1 couple in South Vancouver. As well, we really wanted to capture that northern experience. So in Prince George, we had 1 dyad as well. Participants were invited to film based on the recommendations of our research assistants who facilitated the interviews, as well as reviewing the walk-along footage with our professional pre-production and videography team. We were looking for communication skills, charisma, diversity, interest and consent to be filmed, of course, as well as engagement with the built environment during their walk-along interview. So this included hands darting around in the camera frame and really pointing things out so that we were able to get a picture of what they were looking at. Each participant met with our video production team over Zoom to go through any questions, and we made a plan for filming in mid-October of last year in Metro Vancouver and early November in Prince George last year. We were incredibly lucky with the weather, and the snow, I think, started days after our production team left the north. So without further ado, 2 versions of our video have been produced. We're gonna play the approximately 8-minute version, but we also have a 1.5-minute teaser that's able to be shared on social media. So I will get this video going.
Awesome. So we will walk both of us first, and then both of them will follow. Right on.
Because of my disease, I'm not able to drive. I like to get out in the fresh air. I think that that's important for my health and well-being, getting the blood pumping to my brain.
Walking is really good for you, you know, and good for your mind, good for your brain, and good for your physical. I walk everywhere in here. Walk to shopping in the Victoria Drive, and walk to see the doctor, and walk to see the dentist, walk to see get the medicine.
I realized right from the beginning that there was something not quite right, and it's gradually gotten worse, but I accept it because it's part of life. I'm old enough and good looking enough that I can accept that sort of thing, and you can quit snickering.
My neighborhood is convenient because it does offer, within walking distance, a lot of amenities that I need, and that's important to me. The 3 things that are important are social connectiveness, having a lot of friends, talking, keeping your brain active, socializing. The other thing is exercise, having the blood pump to the brain. And then the other thing is having a passion. So if you have a passion, then you have a purpose in life, and I think that's really helpful, especially with a diagnosis of dementia.
Oh, I think, well, it's important at any time, really, but I think you need to keep moving, because if you're just sedentary, it doesn't take long. If you don't use it, you lose it.
That's the same with your brain.
Yeah.
See this road, I get lost.
Is it here?
Yeah. See, because I turn back here, it's more tree, right, shade. It's not that hot. That day is really hot. Maybe like you said, too hot, just make me confused. Recently, 2 times I get lost, you know. One time we go to the Vancouver mayor, you know. And then when I come out, I just, which way to go? I'm very nervous. And then one time, and then very hot, the summer very hot one day, you know, and then I go to ESL class. And then when I come out, I go to walk different way, you know. I supposed to go to the 48th Avenue and then turn to the Neighbourhood. And then when I go in, I said, where am I? I get lost. The house all different, and the tree is different, roads different, everything different. They plant a young tree here some years ago, you know. Then they build a new thing here not very long ago. I think 3 years ago. And then I am so nervous. I don't know what to do. And then I run, almost running to the, and then I see the Neighbourhood Park, and then, oh, now I know where I am. If I see the Neighbourhood Park, you know, the side there, if I see the park, and then I know I'm home pretty soon. So they lie down that Neighbourhood Park. That's very clear. Yeah. I like clear. Sometimes they faint.
Oh, the sign you
See,
mean?
the sign very clear.
Right.
That's why that day I get lost. I see the Neighbourhood Park. I'm very comfortable. I know the park have the bathroom, and then more easy for me, you know, to go to bathroom. No, before 7 years ago, I'm okay. I don't have to go bathroom that often. But now recently, you know, I have to go bathroom all the time. I get lost 2 times already. So I'm worried I get worse, you know, later. So
I think there has to be very good signage at intersections. What they're doing now is putting even on bus shelters the cross sections so that people know where they are. On the street, there is a fluorescent, it shines in the dark, the name of the street, the cross section both ways. You can see where you are. I think that in the middle of Richmond, there's some intersections that have yellow markings when you're coming up to a curb. That's helpful. Some of the challenges, for the most part, would be the sidewalks are a little bit uneven and have dips and bumps and cracks. So that you have to be very careful not to trip. I have to make sure I lift my feet up and watch where I'm going so I don't fall. I have fallen a couple times in the past with that.
Careful, watch out for?
Well, a lot of times people will ride their bikes on the sidewalk.
That happens to us.
Yeah, and it's hard because they just come up on you, and I have a sometimes I weave a bit, you know, so they, you know, go one side to the other with unconsciously, and they might hit me, and almost have hit me, you know.
You find the odd branch that you don't want to trip on, but that's about it. No sidewalk, keep left facing traffic.
Yep. At this corner here, where do you go, or how do you get back to your place from here?
Straight along here.
So you walk along the grass here?
Oh yeah.
Yeah? And why do you choose to do that?
So I don't have to go across to get on the sidewalk. Sometimes I go over there on the sidewalk, but I don't walk along the road if I don't absolutely have to. No matter where you go in North America, it is geared to driving. It is not geared to walking.
You guys mentioned that you fell a couple times. Are there things like that that you get concerned about?
Yes, because if I step in there the wrong way, without having Charlie with me, if I step in there the wrong way, then I could go face first.
He didn't have the walker when he fell.
Oh, okay.
That's why we made it.
Yes, and you feel more comfortable
I feel
with.
more comfortable about it.
Yeah.
If she feels right about it, I do it.
Right.
You don't want to step in a pothole. The only thing I can really say about this whole scenario, it might not help me, it might not help her, but hopefully it will help somebody else.
I did the dreaded speaking while muted. A huge thank you to our video participants, as well as our post-production and editing by Eric Sanderson, and video pre-production and sit-down footage from Callisto Tony and Farzine McRae. As well, our funders, the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia, and our municipal partners, the City of Burnaby and the City of Richmond. So it's one thing to create great tools. Our next step is to share them. So starting this fall, we're embarking on a MyTax funded knowledge mobilization extension, continuing our collaboration with the City of Burnaby and the City of Richmond. So our planned activities include conducting screenings and group discussions of this video, as well as an accompanying photo exhibit. The second is focus group discussions with municipal planners to develop guidelines that will help them apply knowledge of dementia-friendly streets and outdoor spaces in planning and design. So finding targeted projects, as well as doing surveying targeted streets in Metro Vancouver. As well, we're working with the City of Vernon on co-developing and evaluating a stigma reduction training for city staff. So it's a really exciting time for our project to be able to bring our research to municipalities as well as the community. And then we were able to engage Samantha Pineda, also known for her work with the Flipping Stigma Project, in designing 3 knowledge mobilization postcards. So these highlight our knowledge mobilization tools, especially the planning and design guidelines, and give concrete examples of dementia inclusive design principles, including our video and our stills from the walk along footage. So it was really interesting to be able to use one of those photographs and layer design over it. And each of the 3 designs include QR codes that lead to a different section of our website to explore and learn more. So we'll be bringing these postcards to our community engagement events like the World Cafe discussions and focus groups, as well as upcoming conferences in the fall. So absolutely blasting through this section. We're so lucky to have such an engaged and passionate team. And I will wrap up my section of the presentation and hand it over for discussion.
Thanks so much, Carrie, and thank you, Habib and Kishore, for your parts in the presentation. Very, very interesting work. I just want to invite folks who are still with us to ask some questions to the SFU Demscape team. I know that there were some questions about where folks could find the recording, and I've just included a link in the chat. Usually a few days after the presentation, the recording's available and we post it in our past event sections. So these presentations can always be watched later if you missed a section of it. But we'd love to hear from those of you who are here in terms of any questions or comments you have for the SFU team. So please feel free to just, speak up, or as I said, put a question in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that. Maybe I'll get us started as folks are thinking of things to ask. I was looking at the postcards that Samantha Pineda has developed and some of the knowledge mobilization materials that you went over, Habib, and I'm wondering, were there any surprises in terms of what you found, or are you expecting to find some additional information as you go through all of this data that you've accrued? Because a lot of it seemed quite common sense, like in terms of sidewalks, bathrooms, and places that are accessible. Curious to what you might say about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, some of these are, we kind of knew that this is what might happen, but the first important point is that we need more systematic documentation of this. So what's one thing to know about, okay, this is what people's experiences are, but what is exactly happening in real life, and having documentation, both verbally capturing the experience and connecting that with video. And then visual images. But I think one important element is also something that we're getting into is what might be the variations in some of these the findings that Kishore was presenting. What are the variations in the billscape, for example, in a Metro Vancouver versus Maple Ridge, or versus North? There are variations that will be coming through that we expect as we get into the analysis. And also, again, it's an issue about how important it is when we get to the actual data that this is something we know that people have experience with, but when they are actually responding to the questions and pointing out issues as they're going to go along, is you really get the reality of their experience, which has been very powerful for us. So, when Kishore was talking about some of the participants talking about that scary feeling about where I am, and you kind of encountered that with Esther's on the video, and she was so excited when she saw the Nanaimo Park sign, and she almost felt like she found life back in her, that she found where she lives. So these are important data, hard data that we can present and really make the case. So that's really the one of the advantages of the outputs of this study.
Thanks, Habib. That makes a lot of sense. And as you've mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, that there hasn't really been work that's produced these kinds of findings in terms of being able to demonstrate it afterwards. So that's great to hear. And that video was really powerful when Esther was discovering her sign. That really struck me. And Deborah, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie, Kishore, and Habib. That was really an interesting presentation. As I was writing, you might have already answered this, Habib, and it's probably linked somewhat to Mariko's questions, but I just wanted to think, as you were talking, one of the things that I was struck by is the number of findings that focused around physicality stuff. The sidewalks would be linked to vision, they would be linked to falling, those kind of things. And I was curious as to how you think this looked different, because you were talking to people with dementia. What was not, I didn't see
Right. So that's something we are still looking at as we get into the data and more closely, because the expectation is that people would have, and people do, not expectation, we did find from our data that people are noticing more elements than one might expect. So simple things like whether there is a curb cut or not, whether there is how much time they have to cross the street, or there are, when again the issue about trees and how trees affect sidewalks and what kind of trees that the city is planting. So there are little elements that we know that people even without dementia would also notice. But for people with dementia, it is an extra dimension about having that condition of cognitive decline would make them even more acutely aware of the environment. And that corresponds with which we know in the other settings, for example, people who live in nursing homes. When we observe them, we already knew this in that context, that they are more attuned to, more susceptible to, more sensitive to environmental stimulation. So we are seeing some of that coming through here as well. So it's really the overall acuteness of being more acute about these sensory input they're getting. It could be like a small change in the pavement. It could be the temperature. It could be what they see visually, what they hear. So all of these are amplified in their perception and cognition.
Good. Thanks.
Thanks for your question, Deb. Colleen, so nice to see you. Your question for the SFU team?
Thank you. Yeah, what a wonderful presentation. This was just fabulous to learn about. And you've just, Habib, mentioned something that I'm wondering about, which is sound. I wondered if your participants spoke at all about sonic or auditory cues that maybe oriented them to the places they move through, in their lives.
Yeah. Kishore, you want to address that from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question, Colleen. We had some participants talk about auditory prompts at pedestrian controlled signals. So one participant spoke about how she prefers verbal prompts over non-verbal prompts, just like, the ticking sound or whatever other sounds that come when the signal comes on. So that was something that was very clear to her, that, okay, this is time for me to cross. And on the flip side, we had participants talk about noise being, a barrier to their walks outside, contributing to overstimulation and making walking outside sometimes overwhelming and stressful. So yeah, I think there was that mention of that in the presentation, but yeah, I think sound as a facilitator was definitely in the context of crossing streets at signalized crossings.
Thanks, Kishore. Any other questions for the group? We have a few minutes left before the end of our time. I do want to point out that Coral has put a comment in the chat that she found the presentation really interesting, especially the comment that North American cities are built for cars. So hopefully this work will contribute to change in that regards when we think about how we want people to get around and engage in our cities. Oh, Alison, I see you have your hand up.
Yep, I just stuck it up. What I love about this work, and it was your answer to Mariko's question, Habib, it's taking something that we've kind of got a sense of, but really being so systematic and asking the questions so carefully and documenting it in new ways that allows us to see it in new ways. And what then becomes that kind of, I don't know if it's like the background question, but it's certainly the next stage of the research is looking at, what we call knowledge mobilization and really thinking about how to do that. And I'm not sure I have a question, but maybe if any of you would like to comment on this idea of taking what we kind of know, but turning it into something in such a systematic way that can then have impact for change.
Right, that's the goal as we move forward, engaging with the municipalities and communities. So yeah, I mean, the knowledge mobilization component of our project was an important part from the very beginning. And we had that formally included in the proposal, and we have been fortunate to have two municipalities be formal partners, Burnaby and Richmond, and now also Vernon is another municipality that has come on board. So there are many things the municipalities can do in their own way. So for example, pedestrian infrastructure, that is critically important of how we maintain sidewalk, to what extent we provide benches, washrooms, a big topic in Vancouver. Do we have washrooms? Well, not really. I mean, this is an ongoing issue for decades now in Vancouver, that not having washrooms, publicly accessible washrooms in the cities, which has been pointed in our other studies, including this one as well. So these are really making the case much stronger that these are elements, having washrooms, having accessible benches, street pedestrian infrastructure will really make a difference in people's decision for people without dementia, people who have physical frailty or mobility challenges, as well as additionally when people have dementia or just have dementia, not have physical other challenges, would make the decision based on whether these supportive features are outside or not. So they make a decision based on these elements, which route to take, whether to go to how far they can go, and then whether they want to make the trip at all at some point in the trajectory. So yeah, again, as we mentioned briefly, we are engaging with municipalities, and there is a lot of interest, especially in these two municipalities, to critically look at what they are doing now and how they can use, adapt, and adopt in some way or form what we have shared here, both from empirical evidence of our participants, as well as knowledge from other municipalities that they're trying to do. So that's part of it, but part of it is also the advocacy piece, so which is where the video comes in. Overall advocacy, not just with the municipal partners, but also community organizations and supporters, to really make the case stronger that we really make to change the environment in the neighborhood as part of dementia-friendly initiatives. So yeah, I mean, that's the journey that we are starting, that KM. So we'll keep you posted on our website and other presentations.
Absolutely. That idea of evidence-based advocacy is kind of interesting. And
Mhm.
maybe the challenge for all of us moving forward as we're doing this work is to bring to, because the work is hard and, you know, you just go ahead and do it, like the mobilization work, but to also be doing it in that systematic way and documenting and sharing with each other what works. Because I suspect that the municipalities have the same question, which is like people want to make change, but they get stuck, or and they too would want to know what are good ways that we can make these changes. So it's not
Right,
just
right.
one direction thing. Anyway,
One
thank you
thing
guys.
we have done in the guidelines is we talk about dementia-friendly path as a starting point. So creating a dementia-friendly path, because if you think about whole municipality, Burnaby, Richmond, it can be overwhelming. So we can start with in a small scale way, a dementia-friendly path as a demonstration project. And so this is the path, we do make some changes, a designated dementia-friendly path, come and visit and see how people are using it and collect data and make a case for scaling up of those elements.
No, that's so nicely put, Habib, and lots of good food for thought with that. I think we are going to begin to end our time together, given that it's past 5:30 here on the West Coast. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. And thank you, Habib and Carrie and Kishore. It's great, Carrie, that you still have the slide up. I'm sure your team would be happy to hear from folks who want to hear about your project. And we've got the website up there, so I'm definitely going to be checking that out. But having said that, I'd like to wish you all a good Wednesday evening, wherever you are across the country. And thank you again for taking the time to join us. And thank you again to the SFU team. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you. Always closing the Zoom. I'm like, I have multiple screens open. I'm like, where